Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Michigan Convention of States. This is an introduction to who we are. We're going to answer your questions, bring you some information that maybe you didn't know you needed to have. Hi, my name is Robin Riddell. I am the State Communications Coordinator for Convention of States in Michigan. We are a very large grassroots movement, a national grassroots movement with a very active team here in Michigan. A lot of people still don't know who we are, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, if you're tuning in, you do have the opportunity to participate. I would encourage you to use the chat feature on whatever channel you are on. This is our first time on Rumble, to do anything on Rumble. So we are looking forward to seeing how this goes. If you are out there and you are watching, let's test this a little bit. Let me know where you're coming in from, and I will be able to see that in our chat, in our comments stream. So let's make this interactive. Show us that you're there. And please, if you have a question, don't wait for questions. Put it in there and we will stop and answer your questions as we go. So, Convention of States Michigan is part of a national grassroots movement, calling on our state legislators to call for an Article 5 Convention of the States for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. We are about who decides, not what is decided. After all, isn't that what your freedom is all about? If you believe in self-governance and making decisions that are aligned with your values and beliefs, without someone trying to mandate what those decisions should be, stay with us for the next several minutes as we show you that we, the people, have the power to propose amendments to the Constitution if we are willing to work for it. This is truly a unifying, nonpartisan, freedom-loving movement for liberty that is centrally aligned with what our founding fathers fought so hard to give us. Oh, I see we do have some people here from, I'm not sure. There's somebody said hello to me. We've got someone in Bad Axe. We've got someone in Ortonville. It's nice to know we have an audience. I want to bring in our presenter today. Let me take this banner down. I would like you all to meet John Polstra. John is a region captain covering our teams in northern Washtenaw County, Livingston County, and most of Oakland County. John, welcome to COS Online.
Hello, everyone.
Now, I know you've presented this information dozens of times, but this is your first time online, right?
Yes, it is.
You're not nervous at all, are you?
No.
No?
Just me and the screen.
All right, well, let's get you warmed up for a little bit. And in 1 minute, could you tell the audience a little bit about why you volunteer with Convention of States? What brought you on board?
Well, like most people, I had a career in raising children, and I was pretty busy and focused on accomplishing that. But it was around 2016 that I really became concerned about the direction our nation was going. Excuse me there. Of course, that would happen during my podcast.
Yes.
Streamline. So anyway, I became concerned in about 2016 in the direction our nation was taking. I saw that with one of Trump's rallies in San Jose, for instance, the attendees were attacked, actually, and the San Jose Police Department actually participated in that by directing the crowd to the mob. And that to me was very disturbing. And then shortly after that, or maybe before that, uh, Milo Yiannopoulos, a gay conservative, was to speak at Berkeley. And they basically shut him down with riots and vandalism. And again, the police did absolutely nothing. And it showed to me that we're beginning to have a two-tier justice system. And so in 2016, I began thinking, how can we make changes? And I was thinking down the path of the Constitution, because a constitutional amendment was the only solution big enough for these problems. And, I thought about it and thought about it. And then I, by happenstance, came across an article with Convention of States. And I thought, that's the answer right there. I don't have to lead this necessarily. The movement is already in motion. And so I joined up immediately.
You woke up a little earlier than I did. I know I was paying attention back then, but I didn't take action. So I'm glad you're here. We appreciate you taking part of your afternoon to do an introduction to Convention of States so we can share with we've got many people who have come online with us. There's Joshua in the west coast of Michigan, Mark in Brighton, Sarah says, hi, John.
Hi.
Yeah, there's somebody else in Western Michigan. So we are reaching out across our state to get this information to you. I think it may be life-changing. So I'm going to take myself out of the screen. John, go ahead and put up your let's see, I'll put your presentation up. I'm going to leave the screen, and ladies and gentlemen, tune in to what John has to say.
Okay, very good. Well, again, this is an introduction to the Convention of States Action Organization, where we recognize the problem, we have the solution, and we hope to get you involved. So with that being said, the problem. First off, the division in our nation is greater than it ever has been since the Civil War. And we know how that ended up, with 600,000 men dying. By today's standard, that would be 6 million people. And this division, unfortunately, has led to polar politics. I think that our two parties are further divided because of this division than they ever have been before. And then, unfortunately, these polar politics lead to extreme government policies, policies that affect, say, our First Amendment rights, with government coercion of social media to censor individuals, government policy, say, under Section 702 of FISA, that allows the government to spy, and under the 14th Amendment, the having equal protection under the law, and having a two-tiered system of justice. So these are kind of frightening. And what does that lead to? Well, that leads to tyranny. And I'm not saying that we have a tyrannical government right now. I know that many people do say that we do have a tyrannical government, but I'm saying that it's leading to that. When I think of a tyrannical government, I think of Iran, for instance, that throws gay people off of rooftops, or China that harvests organs from dissenters. Or I think of Russia, where my uncle was executed in the basement of a police station the same day he said that life in Germany and America is better than here in Russia. That took place back in the 1920s. So we're not quite there yet, but again, we are on the path as I see it. So what are some of the drivers of this? Um, well, we have the debt and spending, our national debt. We have career politicians that enter as maybe regular people, but somehow, some way, they become multi-millionaires by the end of their terms of office. And then we have federal overreach into our lives and overreach into state government for that matter. So these are the drivers that are leading to tyranny. So talking about national debt, just to understand that a little bit more, you see in this chart, tremendous growth, exponential growth to the point where we're at $34 million or trillion, that's with a T, trillion in debt. And you notice that this isn't under a Republican or Democrat administration. This is either or. This is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. And it continues to increase and is locking our children, our grandchildren into servitude, or at least with limited choices, limited freedom of choice in the future. There are a few ways that this could be resolved, and I'll talk about more of the solution later. But government solutions right now seem to be, well, we'll borrow more or we'll print money. And this just exacerbates the situation. It exacerbates the problem itself by doing this. And I have fear in the future that the government may call in this debt, because this debt doesn't belong to the government. This debt actually belongs to you and me. And at any time, this debt could be called in through, not giving tax returns would be a simple way, or putting liens on your property in order to achieve this debt reduction that belongs to each and every single one of us. So beware. Let's put it in a different perspective. From the standpoint of a child born today is automatically $78,000 in debt. And by the time that they reach 18 at this rate of debt, they'll be 143,000 in debt and 226,000 in debt by the time that they're actually established as adults at the age of 30. That's just unconscionable. That is unacceptable. But yet, that is the path our government is on. So let's talk about the career politicians that I mentioned before that come in, as maybe regular people and end up being multimillionaires at the end. Pretty good gig. And you can see that with 4 of the most notable politicians being in place in office for 39 years or 43 years. And I know that we have Dianne Feinstein that kind of dates this presentation still in there, but we could replace her with another politician very easily. Probably Nancy Pelosi would be a good substitute for Dianne Feinstein right now. But the point being is that these politicians, they want to remain in power. And that is part of the problem. We need to have new blood, new ideas, a change. We need to have uh, politicians that don't know how to game the system. And so we'll lead on later to the solution. The other problem, or part of the problem also, is the reelection rate of these politicians. As you can see, once you're in office, it's a pretty done deal. You're going to stay in office. So no matter what your performance is, and obviously we have seen very poor performance from government, but yet we keep reelecting them. And I say that a lot of the reason behind that is that we as individuals are programmed for brand loyalty. We keep reelecting the incumbents out of brand loyalty. And this comes from the way we evolved thousands of years ago when we were gathering nuts and berries, the nuts and berries that were familiar to us, that we knew we were safe. And we rejected I'll call it the new nuts or berries. And this evolved to, tribalism, to city states where our loyalty made a difference of whether we lived or died. And it just all came about by evolution. And we just have this natural tendency to re-elect the incumbent out of this brand loyalty that is genetically programmed in us. So, but this wasn't a problem before. This wasn't a problem back in 1789. And this was because the politicians back then didn't look at this office holding as a career. They looked at it as service, and a temporary service. And so the average tenure, despite the reelection of them, they chose to leave. They chose to let somebody follow behind and to continue the work that they had started. And this was very noble of them. And this stems back to Washington choosing to only serve 2 terms as a president. That was the mindset of our founding fathers, was, to serve the nation, but then to go back to what they did before they became a politician and office holder. But as time went on, as you can see from the chart, the tenure continued to grow and grow. And again, I'll say it's about the power, and it's about coming out as multimillionaires, and that doesn't help the nation at all. So finally, the other driver of this problem is, the federal government overreach. Now, if you look at the Constitution, the federal government had certain responsibilities that they gave the federal government because the states alone, couldn't manage these things, like treaties with foreign countries or national defense, punishing pirates, or establishing a court system beneath the Supreme Court, regulating our currency, establishing standard weights and measures, naturalization of citizens, bankruptcy laws, establishing post office, and then finally interstate commerce, which I have bolded at the bottom. At the beginning of our founding of the nation and under the Articles of Confederation, states were much more sovereign, and they were allowed to apply tariffs to interstate commerce. And, some states, they really didn't get along with other states. And this impacted, the economic growth of our nation that Alexander Hamilton, actually saw that this was a hindrance, to our nation, to our the strength of our nation, to the defense of our nation, and all aspects, and that we needed to have the federal government oversee interstate commerce, and especially, when it came to trade, international trade, and tariffs. But things got a little bit out of hand. And in 1942, the Supreme Court heard a case called, Wickard versus Filburn. Now, what this was about was in 1942, in order to control wheat production and wheat sales, the government made up some regulations stating that you could only sell so much wheat across state lines. And that, this, of course, was, I guess, to balance, the production between the different states and, to help out states. There's always good intentions. But unfortunately, this led to, say, a crack in the wall of government overreach. What happened was Filburn had the idea of, okay, that I would, sell what I could across state lines, but I would produce much more, and I would use it on my farm. I would use it for my livestock. I would use it for my family, and that we would, use use up the overproduction, if you want to call it that. Well, the government got wind of it, and they fined Filburn for that so-called overproduction, and he fought this up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled against him with the opinion that his usage, his personal usage of the wheat had an impact, affected the sales, pricing, and affected interstate commerce. And therefore, the government had a right to fine Filburn for this. Well, you can look at almost any aspect of our lives and what we buy and what we use then as affecting interstate commerce. In fact, you could almost apply that to illegal activities as well. It's just phenomenal if you don't buy a product, you're affecting interstate commerce because you're lowering the price because you're not buying something, versus if you do buy something, then yeah, you're affecting interstate commerce because of your demand, will then increase the price. So it just, it's that crack in the wall that this case brought about a lot of government overreach. Another case that the Supreme Court heard that gave the government tremendous overreach powers was Chevron. And this was a case where Chevron fought against the EPA and the regulations that came out of the that agency, and that they were not in line with the laws that were passed, was their argument. The Supreme Court gave the EPA deference and said that the agency can set its, own regulatory, agenda based on how they interpreted the laws that came from Congress. So this again opened up a wide berth for government overreach by bureaucracy. In fact, it's so prevalent that if you might recall during the COVID shutdowns, many lobbyist groups actually lobbied, like the CDC, for instance. The president of the teachers union basically went directly to the CDC to now lobby them for their regulations for, controlling individual freedom, uh, and bypass Congress altogether. You know, the Congress and our representatives who are making laws are actually becoming, if you want to say, antiquated to the strength and the power of the bureaucracies themselves. And that is not how government is supposed to operate. This is supposed to be representative government, and the Congress is supposed to represent us, not the bureaucracies. So, anyway, let me move on. So, this federal overreach, 2012 is an example that we have of the non elected bureaucrats wrote 193 laws costing us at least $100 million each. And these were over 80,000 pages of regulations. In that, you can't help but violate some regulation unintentionally. Uh, it's estimated that we as Americans commit 3 felonies per day with these regulations that we're completely oblivious about. So this federal overreach is just gone too far. The Constitution itself has been, I'll call, corrupted, with now being, how should I say, it started being just 4 pages of a document. But when you read all of these interpretations, like Chevron and like Filbert, and they have the weight of law themselves, our Constitution has now become 3,000 pages long, from 4 pages to 3,000 pages. Now, we're not, opposed to the Constitution, but we are opposed to this new operating Constitution that has been corrupted from, I think, its original intent. So that kind of sums up where we are with the problems and the drivers of those problems. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. So, what is the solution? Well, the solution begins with a convention of the states. A solution is in Article 5 of our Constitution. And is that solution safe? So, our organization, the Convention of States Action, our mission is to build an engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists. Our nation is a representative nation, and we as the citizens, we the people, are the ones that are supposed to be in control, and we are supposed to be engaged with our representatives in government. Whether it's local or state or federal government, it's up to us to give them direction. Our aspirational goal is to inspire a political and spiritual awakening in America. Our aspirational goal should be in alignment with our morals, with our values as a nation, with the history of our nation. And so that would be the spiritual awakening of America. So Article 5, part of the solution, says that Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution or on the application on the legislators of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislators of 3/4 of the several states. So our approach is using the Constitution. It is constitutional, it is lawful, and our approach is to address these problems with constitutional amendments that are driven through Article 5. So let's just take a look at the two paths that I just explained on Article 5, the two paths to amend the Constitution. The first path that most people are familiar with, and the only path actually that has successfully ratified 27 constitutional amendments, has begun in Congress. And they usually introduce, debate, and vote on an amendment. At any time, any congressman can make a motion for a constitutional amendment. There is no restriction to that. And like I said, any session, anytime, a congressman can make that motion. So then, if it passes that motion and it passes with 2/3 support in both chambers, both the Senate and in the House of Representatives, then it becomes a proposed amendment. That would then go to the state legislators, and that proposed amendment would be voted on by 50 different state legislators. And let me remind you that the legislators, for the most part, are also two chambers. And if it's ratified by at least 3/4 of the states, which happen to be 38 states right now, 3/4 of 50, in both chambers, then it becomes a constitutional amendment. All right, the second path that I read from Article 5 is much less known or understood. And that begins with 2/3 of the states, which happen to be 34 states right now, pass a resolution to call for a convention. And that resolution, of course, would have to be the same resolution for all of these 34 states. Understand that this process has occurred, and there are over 300 states, that have passed a resolution for a convention, or not 300 resolutions passed by states. There are approximately 44 states that have open applications for a convention. But the problem or the issue is that they are not all the same resolution. There has to be 34 states that pass the same resolution, the same wording in that resolution. Otherwise, with 44 states already having open applications, we could have that convention of states today. But like I said, that's not the case. There has to be 34 states with the same resolution. So what happens then is that a convention is called. And when that convention is called, all of the states could attend. The 16 states that did not pass the resolution, they are invited to attend this convention. They have a voice, they have an equal voice in this convention, whether or not they pass the resolution or not. But they are invited all the same, and all 50 states have representatives, which are referred to as commissioners. If you want to call them delegates, that would be fine. But technically speaking, they are commissioners, and they will introduce motions of wording for an amendment, a debate on it, and vote on those amendments. These commissioners have a specific commission from their state legislator of what their limits of power are, what their limits of authority are. So if any of those given motions passes with the majority of the states that are attending, and be it known that it's one state, one vote, so the proposed amendment would then be passed if there's 26 states that have agreed to that specific wording of the amendment. Now, it's still a proposed amendment, and it goes back to the state legislators, to each state legislation to vote by the states. And once again, the requirement is still the same. 38 states have to ratify this proposed amendment in both their chambers. And if that is done, then it becomes an amendment to the Constitution. So, what is the process?
John.
Yes, go ahead.
John, I thought I'd give you a break in case you need to get a sip of water. Or
sure, I'll do that right now.
If you could go back to that previous slide.
Okay. Yes.
This here, for the benefit of our audience, this is the story, and this is the real deal. Most of us have never learned about this. This is a light bulb moment for us to know that there is another path for making changes that we don't have to use to go through Congress. Actually, there's a comment here in the chat by Mayor. Most people I talk with don't know there are two paths to the end to amend the Constitution. I've had that same experience, and in fact, the first time I heard about Convention of States and watched a presentation, this was a light bulb moment. So this, to me, is the big takeaway here. And I just wanted to, one, give you a chance to take a breath, and two, firmly put this in everyone's mind. This is the key right here.
Well, let me add to what you just said. All right. It isn't just a light bulb moment for us, but also it was a light bulb moment to add this second pathway to the Constitution during the Philadelphia Convention. James Mason realized near the end of the Constitutional Convention that they did not have a way for the states to hold the federal government accountable if the federal government started to become tyrannical, started to, go off on its own, so to speak. They, of course, had the amendment process already laid out through that first path that I described. But, James Mason, in I'll call light bulb moment, realized, we don't have full control here, of the states. And be it known, it's the states that created the federal government. So it should be the states that can control and modify the federal government. And that's when he introduced the second pathway. And all of the member Constitutional Convention agreed. And this vote was unanimous. Now, of all of the clauses and sections and articles and on about the Constitution, there was always debate, and there was always difference. And the vote was, up, down, close, etc. But this was the only unanimous vote. It was like so obvious that this needed to be included in our Constitution. All right, let me move on
All right. While you do that, there's a comment in here from one of our viewers who said, so the founders intended for the states to amend the Constitution. So what that is, what John is talking about here is there are two ways to amend the Constitution. All of us know about the first one. That's what we've lived by. We're here to tell you about the second one. And for anyone that wants to dig deeper into this, look up and read about George Mason.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said James. George. Yes. My mistake.
Okay. All right. I'm out of here and let you get back to it.
I was thinking of James Madison, the father of the Constitution, but yeah, George Mason. Yes. Well, another point though on this first pathway, it is much better known because all 27 of the amendments have been passed, through this pathway, and a great deal of the reason why is because it's an easier pathway. As I mentioned before, in any given session, on any given day, any given congressman can make a motion for a constitutional amendment, whereas the other pathway requires 34 states legislators to pass the resolution. That makes it so much more difficult, and that's the reason why this pathway is almost dearly forgotten, for that matter. So that's the reason why the first pathway, the congressional pathway, is so well known. So, all right. Let's see. Are there any other questions before I move on? This is you can ask the question anytime, but this is kind of the overview here, if you will. We, the people, are the ones who lead. We need to be engaged with our representatives in government. We have to let them know what we want. Otherwise, they're going to steer off course, so to speak. The state legislators, they, need to act based on what we say. They need to look at these resolutions and to pass them both in the House and in the Senate. When there's 34 states that have done so, we submit an application to Congress for a convention. Now, that doesn't mean that they approve it. Their responsibility primarily is just to set a time and a place and invite the other 16 states that had not passed the resolution so that those 16 states have an equal voice in this convention. Amendments, are proposed, the specific language, whether the term limits are 3 terms, 4 terms, 5 terms, but the amendments, are proposed during this convention, and it's an up and down vote of, of a majority of the states, 26, to whether or not the proposed amendment becomes final. And again, each state has one single vote. So when it goes to ratification, when it goes back to the state legislators for their vote, 38 states need to ratify this. You might ask, well, if you're only able to get 34 states to agree to have a convention, how are you going to get 4 additional states to ratify it when they didn't even want to have a convention to begin with? I'll cover that a little bit later, but I can, but I want to at least pose the question now. So after the 38 states pass this amendment, ratify this amendment, I should say, then it becomes an official amendment to our Constitution. All right, so we talked a lot about resolution. And our strategy at the Convention of States is to work with the state legislators in order that we have the same or very, very similar language in each state resolution that gets passed. We try to provide, I'll say, our guidance. And so we have here an example of that resolution or that application for a convention of states under Article 5 of the Constitution, so that it is worded similar to all of the other states. Because, as I said earlier, you had to have 34 states with the same or similar. Currently, there are 44 states that have applications out there, but they are not all the same. They cover a variety of topics going back in history, from women being able to vote, 18-year-olds being able to vote, and prohibition, you name it. But there are 44 states that have open applications for a convention on a variety of topics. Michigan, for instance, currently has 8 applications open right now for various topics. So any state, doesn't have just one. They may have several out there, which is where I mentioned the number. Over 300 of these applications have already been made. So, all right. So the meat of that language can be found right here in that application that I showed earlier. The legislation of the state of Michigan, for instance, hereby applies to Congress under the provisions of Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States for a calling of a convention of these states limited to proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States. Now, that's very important. Limited to proposing amendments. This is not a constitutional convention, okay? This is a convention simply to propose amendments to the Constitution. So it is under the authority of the Constitution, just to be clear. So to move on, the United States that imposes fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and members of Congress. So you may ask, well, this is the meat of our application, the meat of our resolution in each state. Why is it that we're focused on these 3 particular topics? Well, these topics are chosen to restrict the lifeblood of tyranny. As I mentioned before, we are on a path to tyranny. A tyranny needs 3 things to survive. It requires unlimited power, unlimited time, unlimited funding. That's the lifeblood of tyranny. Time, power, money. Now, if you can restrict that, you put a check on tyranny. You won't be able to have a tyrannical government. And that is why these 3 topics are so important to suppress that pathway that we're on right now towards tyranny. So, again, our strategy, we are a nonpartisan organization. Our strategy includes Republicans, Democrats, and others as well. This is not a partisan issue. This is an American issue. And from our polling, we see that the majority of Americans affiliated with any one party shows that the majority of Americans want to have these proposed topics discussed in a convention of the states for the purposes of proposing amendments to the Constitution. They want term limits, they want fiscal restraints, and they want the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government limited. So those are the topics. Endorsements. We have a lot of support, not just Republican or Democrat, but support from constitutional lawyers, constitutionalists, from conservative commentators, from a variety of political office holders. And, this list is not limited. I just took a random sampling of names to make this clear that, this organization of ours, the Convention of States Action, is not some, I'll say, fly-by, wacko, extremist type of organization. That if you look at some of these names here, they are very, very well grounded. So where are we at in our strategy? What is our progress so far? We have 19 states already that have passed the resolution on those 3 topics mentioned and have made application to Congress. There are several more states that you may see in the blue that have that have activity. Usually it's a resolution that's in committee that needs to be discussed. And then in the yellow, there's currently one state right now that it has passed one chamber of their legislature. So that's currently where we're at. Now, of course, this slide is dated. Since then, Hawaii and Massachusetts would be in the blue. They have active activity going on. In fact, I believe that the Hawaii House and Massachusetts House has passed the resolution in committee and has put it out for a floor vote to their House legislation. So there is a lot going on. Unfortunately, Michigan is in the white. There is nothing going on, but in past sessions, there has been. In fact, in past sessions, in years past, they may have been in the yellow, with one chamber having passed the resolution. And in this last session, it was held up in committee and not brought to a floor vote. So even though you may see a state in white, it doesn't mean that in previous sessions there wasn't some kind of activity that occurred.
Can I build on that a little bit?
Yeah, feel free. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't want the audience to be dissuaded here. Michigan is very, very active, and we are currently working on language for additional pieces of legislation that will help satisfy the legislature and the questions that they have. One is to outline the commissioner selection process. There's a lot of debate, discussion on what that should look like. And the second one is what has been called a criminal penalties bill. Sometimes people say, well, they could go to the convention and they could do this or that and the other thing. They can't. They're limited by the 3 pillars of what we're working on here. And if they try to go outside of their pure purview, they could face criminal penalties. So that language is being worked on in the Michigan legislature right now, prior to it being introduced. And once that's introduced, I assume we will reintroduce the legislation here as well. So we're active. We're not blue. We're not yellow. We're busy.
We're busy. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Robin. Part of the delay or the resolution is that there is a fear of what's called a runaway convention, a convention that I think Robin just touched on a little bit with a commissioner going outside of their lane, going outside of what their commission was that was issued by the state legislators. So, but again, Robin described penalties would be involved in something like that. So, this runaway convention, we can touch upon it based on the authorities and based on precedent. From the authority standpoint, it begins with the Constitution, and it begins with the resolution, and it begins with what is allowed to create a convention by having the same wording in the same resolution and the application to it. And if they're not the same, then it doesn't count as part of the 34. So there's a limitation, right at the very beginning of the authority based on what the Constitution says and allows. So then there's the resolution itself, and that authority is very specific, as I said before, on the given topics that, are allowed to be discussed. And then it's the state legislators who control what the authority is for the commissioners who attend this this event, this convention, and how that they are to conduct themselves, what their limits are, and as Robin described, what penalties they would face if they exceeded those limits. So, what if?
John.
Yes.
There's a question here that I think is worth calling out and maybe addressing. Can we force our state to comply?
I am not sure how to interpret that question. Are we speaking of a state that has passed the resolution, or a state that has not passed the resolution? Would be my first question on that.
So maybe the question, they will come back with more detail. Forcing our state to comply. Our grassroots people here in Michigan, I'll give you my interpretation of the answer. This is a grassroots effort of us working with our legislators in our local communities across the state. Can we force them? We can persuade them, and we're very persistent as far as getting them to adopt this resolution. Even if Michigan does not buy into this, and I would hate to see that, I hope we're one of the 34 states, but even if the Michigan legislature does not adopt this resolution, there will be a convention. This movement is growing exponentially every day. There will be a convention, and Michigan will be invited. And if the COS people have anything to say about it, we will all be there to participate. So here, there's some clarification on the question. Our state is not under voter control. How do we get our state to work with this? John, I believe you're going to wrap up this presentation with what we can do, and I think that might answer the question, right?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to take that off and give this back to you.
Okay.
There's another comment in here. We don't need the governor to support us.
No, we do not.
The governor has zero say in this. This is about our legislators. So John and others, we go to Lansing, we're talking to them, we're networking with them. So the government Whitmer has no say whatsoever.
Right.
Back to you, John.
All right. Well, I think to answer that question, and how do we get our state to work with this? How do we get our state legislators to work with this? We have to be persuasive, and numbers helped to persuade. It isn't just me, and it isn't just Sarah Santana, our state director. It requires constituents. Let me move on and I know that I'm going to go through a couple of these slides very quickly because we've already run out of our 1 hour. But we need to be engaged with our state legislators. As Robin mentioned earlier, our agenda, we are passing a criminal penalty bill. We're engaged with our legislators. We're trying to pass a commissioner selection resolution. Some of these legislators use the excuse, oh, well, the Constitution doesn't say how commissioners are selected. And my response is, well, that's your fault. You're supposed to do it as a state legislator. So, you can't use an excuse like that of you failing to do your job as an excuse not to have a convention. So they need to take on responsibility. We, as constituents, need to hold them accountable for their responsibilities. So again, being engaged, and that's what being part of a grassroots organization is all about, is being engaged. That's what self-governance is about, being engaged, calling your legislators, writing to your legislators. Hell, if you want to form a protest, do that. That's being engaged. So these are the things that we are trying to do from an organizational standpoint, but we're trying to get the constituents, we're trying to get the large body of population behind us on this, and that's persuasive to have that. So going back to real quick, that runaway convention. Let me sum up a couple of things. The runaway convention, if it were going to happen, it already would happen through the first pathway through Congress, because that's the easier pathway. Since it has not happened, I don't think it's going to happen through a more difficult pathway, which is the Convention of States. That just does not make any sense at all. If it was going to occur, it would have already occurred, all right, through the easier pathway of Congress. Many times people will bring up that our constitutional convention was a runaway, that it was really intended to amend the Articles of Confederation. Well, that is not true. That is, I think, confusing perhaps the Annapolis Convention that preceded the Philadelphia Convention, where in the Annapolis Convention, they had the task, they had the commission to address tariff and trade issues up the Potomac River. The problem is that the states were so fed up with the Articles of Confederation that required 13 states to agree in order to make an amendment to this Articles of Confederation, that they just stopped going because it was a waste of their time. The Annapolis Convention was attended by 5 states out of 13. And so those commissioners did not collectively make a recommendation as a whole to the Confederation of the States, but rather to each of their individual states. Hey, this isn't going to work anymore. Our recommendation to each of those states was that we need a new form of government, period, because nothing is going to happen. This isn't going to work any longer. Only 5 states attended Annapolis. So that's where it's thought that they went out of their bounds of commission, but they were not making a recommendation to the country as a whole. They were only going back to their individual states. So only 5 states heard that. So Virginia took it upon themselves to invite the rest of the other states to a convention, the Philadelphia Convention, for the purpose of a new form of government. And that was rolled out in the very first step, where they rolled out the Virginia Plan. That was the first motion. The Virginia Plan was to replace the Constitution. So I don't know how we get down this path of a runaway when right out of the box, the Virginia Plan was introduced to replace the Articles of Confederation. As things went on, it was a 2-step process, and the states legislators of the states, began the process of ratifying that Constitution. And the biggest difference was that this new Constitution only required 9 states to approve it. It only required 9 or 3/4 of the states to make amendments to it, versus the Articles of Confederation that required it to be a unanimous decision. So by the time we got to the end, when our country was being formed, 11 states had ratified it, which was enough. Remember, they only needed 9 states to ratify the Constitution. And the nation's government began to form, and the other 2 states, I think North Carolina and Rhode Island, kind of followed a year later, a little bit later, as things were evolving. So that's the real history of our Philadelphia Convention. So,
John,
yes.
I'm going to insert something in here because we've got questions on how to get involved, and we are running overtime here.
Yes, we are. I'm sorry.
So the way to get started on this for everyone is to make sure you've signed our petition. That goes to your legislator. It goes to your local legislator, asking them to support this. And here is, I'm going to give you a QR code. You can either grab this from here. I will also be putting up our website address near the end of this. And if you would like to be a volunteer, you can indicate that on your petition. If you've already signed the petition, but you're ready to get involved because that's what it's going to take, here is a QR code for you to be able to snap so that you can volunteer. And what will happen is, again, you will be contacted by someone in your geographic area. And we've got people all of the way from the top to the bottom of the state. We have teams of people working. John, we're coming up on a minute or an hour, 9 minutes. So can we wrap this up in the next 5 minutes?
I think it's pretty well wrapped up right now. You brought us to the end.
I did bring us to the end.
But we can answer questions.
Yeah, are there any more questions in the chat? I'm going to put our website address up. I'm going to give you, first of all,
Here.
here's an email address. If you've got questions for us, use this email address to reach out to us. And if it comes to me, if I can answer it, I will, or I'll forward it to John, or I'll forward it to somebody in your part of the state. And here is our website. This is a great place to go and to bookmark and to look around. We have built a Michigan website for Michigan people. It will tell you at all times what our events are, what we're working on, everything. And we are, like I said, busy and working. So be sure to check out our website. Let me see if we have any more questions. What types of things can you do as a volunteer? John, how about you answer that question?
Well, if you give me back control.
You should be able to put, there's your presentation. There you go.
All right. So
all right, there you go.
We're going to get there. What can we do? There we are. This is the slide. So there are a lot of different activities that you can do if you volunteer, such as a social media team and being involved there, videographer, content writer, legislative liaison if you have a legal background of some kind. You can be just a regular volunteer that gets involved in, writing letters, recruiting other people, recruiting your neighbors to sign our petition, being
work on events.
Yeah, events. We go to a lot of different festivals and events and have an information table there, so you can help us with that as a volunteer. Perhaps you can also do some phone bank calling. We call it telepatriot, but I think most people understand it as a phone bank. And so there's lots of things. Block walking is another volunteer activity, and going around just door to door. You could be a district captain. We divide up our areas by house district so that there's a district captain specific for a given house representative. Or you might be an event coordinator that gets us a table at a festival or at some event or another. And then there's our veterans team to be engaged with the veterans as well. So there is a plethora of activities that volunteers can be involved in.
So there was a question in here about being involved if you don't have time every month. Yes, the answer is yes. I'm the head of the comms team. I'll tell you what, if you're involved on social media, I like to tell people, if you can grab 10 to 15 minutes at a time to share and post some things on your favorite social media channel, we can use you. We're very sensitive to putting you into a slot that matches your skills and your time available. Okay.
Right.
And again, John went through all of these. There's something for everyone. I do want to say, legislative liaison, you don't have to be a lawyer in there. That their main role is to liaise, one of my favorite words, with the legislators. So if you like to meet and greet and talk and persuade and bring back information, build relationships, all of these things are about building relationships across the state.
Yep. Yeah, and in terms of time commitment, I have a lot of volunteers that go on vacation through the winter. There is no, if you want to say, commitment of time. It's a volunteer of time. When you're available, hey, fine, then do it then. It's not that we're holding you to any kind of a schedule. It's as you want.
There's another question here about, is there someone to show us how to do things? You will be pleased to know that everybody here gets training. All of us get some free online training that, for me personally, filled in the missing pieces of history that I learned way back in the day. And it gets us all on the same page with the same language. And then, yes, there's training for your specific role. We coach people, we mentor people. we're truly building a team of supportive people, and I'm just going to insert my 2 cents worth here to say these are some of the best people that I have ever worked with. They're caring, they follow through, they care about our country, and they are willing to do something about it. So sign that petition and then become a volunteer. John, take us home. Wrap it up.
All right. Well, since I've been involved in Convention of States, I think it's been very rewarding for me just to be with like-minded people and to be engaged with others, to be engaged with those in Convention of States, to be engaged with the general public and explaining and describing to them, what our nation needs. And it's been a lot of positive feedback at various festivals and events, and engaged with our representatives in Lansing, for instance. So we have many that are supportive, and of course we have many that are not so supportive, but we have time and we can convince them otherwise. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And again, this has been very rewarding for me since I started back 3 years ago.
Makes it easier to watch the news at night, doesn't it?
I don't know if it makes it easier.
All right. So earlier on, I did put a link in there to our webpage with some events, but let me tell you about a couple of things coming up. On alternate weeks, we are doing a new feature. It's primarily on Facebook. I think you can find it on YouTube as well, called Time Out with COS Moms. It's really short, bite-sized elements of this presentation that's geared towards moms, and especially moms who like to pass along information to their friends, their family, and to teach their children about our country. Coming up, if you go to our website, you will see that we've got stuff going on in the south of the state, down in Monroe. We are up north. We've got a big event in Gaylord next month on Saturday, May 11th, Rescuing America's Freedom. We will be at the Blessing of the Bikes rally in Baldwin in May. We are actually putting together the Freedom Rally that I hope all of you, whether you ride a bike, a motorcycle, a Harley Davidson or not, to please join us there in Lansing on June 1st. So much going on. It is all on our calendar, and I invite you to look at it and join us, please. Thank you all for being here. John, thank you. It was a pleasure. Well done. And thanks,
thank you.
everyone.